Hello and welcome. Kuan Yin, bienvenue, meher haben, bienvenida, acabo, barut habaut, ilari fasiuna. Welcome again. For all of you whose languages I have mangled, I apologize for both my nerves and my generally bad ear, but welcome everyone. I am here in Hilton Head, South Carolina, on the traditional and unceded lands of the Esquimalt and Yamasee people. I share, however briefly and incompletely, with their ancestors and descendants, past and present, an enduring relationship to this land and to this water. I also stand in the space of Gullah Geechee people who have stewarded this land and water for generations and whose cultures continue to shape it. I recognize the historical and contemporary brutal injustices enacted on these communities. This panel, considering how artists, scholars, and teachers of theater and performance can persist in this moment of upheaval, betrayal, violence, and uncertainty, is a part of my commitment and ATHE's commitment to making a more equitable and just future. Yesterday, the New York Times morning newsletter addressed some of the threats to higher education posed by the Trump administration, suggesting that the financial implications were dire indeed. And on June 22nd, an editorial conversation between Lawrence Summers, former president of Harvard, and Times columnists Russ Douthat and Frank Bruni suggested that it was time for institutions of higher education to, quote, stop inhabiting the ideological plane, end quote, and return to the real world, focusing on what they considered students' real goals, quote, GPA and job prospects, rather than social justice, end quote. So, how do we feel? How are you doing? I invite you to use the chat function now as I introduce our panelists and the panel to share one word or a short phrase about what you feel and what you hope come September. I also invite you to use the chat throughout for any questions or comments. We'll be monitoring it, but of course we won't take any questions until all of the panelists have spoken. Today's panelists have long and very impressive biographies. And because we only have a very short 69 minutes left, I'm only going to introduce them with their current affiliations in relation to our conversation today. So let me start her first, and this will be the order in which folks speak as well. Rosemary Candelario is an associate professor in the Department of Theater and Dance at the University of Texas, Austin, and current president of the Dance Studies Association. CarlosAlexis Cruz, professor in the University of North Carolina, Charlotte's Department of Theater, is the president of ATHE. Patricia Herrera is the president of the American Society for Theater Research and professor in theater and dance at the University of Richmond. Jake Pinholster is a professor of theater and dean of the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Martine Key Green Rogers, professor and dean of the theater school at DePaul University, is the incoming president of ATHE. And Patrick J. Sims is the provost at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. Our panelists were asked to respond to three provocations. First, what is your organization or institution doing to support faculty and students, artists, scholars, and staff to keep things real in this coming year? What is the one thing you are most hopeful about being able to do? And what is the one action you are most prepared to take and to support? So now I'm just going to throw it right straight over to Rosemary. And but before I do, I'm sorry. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Leanna, who's monitoring this whole Zoom interface, to Amy Zygmonski for all of the amazing work that she does, to Tammy, who is our captioner, and to my amazing small but mighty conference committee who worked with me, been working with me for about a year on this conference. And they are Kel Aliana, I can't remember, Will Lewis, Scott Knowles, Evangeline Jimenez, and Julia Moriarty. But now, Rosemary, and thank you.
Oops. Thank you so much for having me, Kirsten, and for people wondering why is the Dance Studies Association president starting us off on this keynote. Hopefully that will become clear shortly. I'm really pleased to be here. I just wanted to start kind of introducing a little bit about the Dance Studies Association for those of you who are unfamiliar. I know we share some members, but just some excerpts from our mission to begin. DSA advocates for and invests in anti-racist, decolonial, and caste-conscious curation, programming, administration, and labor practices at all levels of the organization. Moreover, DSA aims to / is committed to recentering marginalized voices, experiences, and ideas, expanding modes of access, understanding, and communicating through / with the body. DSA cultivates innovative critical analyses of dance and movement practices through research, publication, performance, and advocacy across the arts, humanities, and social sciences. DSA is committed to the field of dance studies as a place of radical inclusion and political possibility. DSA itself is a community of care. Over and over again, since I became president, in these exciting times that we're in, and thank you everyone for sharing how you are in the chat. I feel like that, yes, all of that, right? So in this time, really, this mission, I keep bringing our board and our organization back to this mission again and again, because whenever we're confused about where to go, scared about where to go, I feel like these words really ground me and keep us assured that, whether we're talking last November, January, whatever, everything that's happened this spring or September, that this is what I keep coming back to. And I just want to share a few facts about who DSA is in terms of our members, because I think this is really helpful too in thinking about what is it that we can do, need to do. We did a member survey last fall, and so these results are all from that survey. Only 1/3 of our members are full-time tenured or tenure-track faculty. A quarter identify as independent scholars. And then another third are a combination of students and or contingent workers. 27% of our members are based outside the US. A quarter of our members have what we called a home base in theater and or performance studies. And again, in our fall 2024 membership survey, there was a question about professional development and what our members wanted from us. And the largest percentage of members, 60%, selected maintaining / supporting academic freedom as an area they want DSA to offer professional development in more than any other category. The other most common categories were, or commonly chosen categories were curriculum development, grant writing, and writing productivity. So maintaining, supporting academic freedom, heard loud and clear. And the last thing I'll say is that among our leadership includes people based in Florida and Texas. I myself am based in Texas, where I live and work, where anti-DEI laws were passed and implemented in 2023, and as well as people from countries like Iran and Turkey, where academic freedom has been under threat. So I feel like we've also been really learning from people who are already in this. So all this to say for DSA, the new normal predated January 20th, 25 for many of our members. As early as the day after the election, we added a virtual presentation option to our conference call, which was just about to go out, recognizing that some people would not be able to or would not be willing to attend our 2025 conference, which happened last month in Washington, D.C. And indeed, we started hearing from people very soon after the inauguration who were concerned about their ability to get visas. And some people were not able to, who were scared to enter the US. We got lots of emails saying what will happen to me at the border. And then also for political reasons who are not willing to enter the US. So to get to why I'm here, by early February, I was feeling very much alone as DSA president and started reaching out to presidents of allied professional societies to see what they were dealing with and how they were dealing with it. I just sent out emails to a bunch of people, and Patricia Herrera, who we'll hear from next from ASTR, was the first to respond and said, yes, let's talk. And so we started talking, and then she connected me to Carlos and Martine, and we started meeting together this spring. We sent a letter to our respective organizations advocating for the National Endowment for the Humanities and encouraging our members to take action. And following this step, we continued meeting, and our conversations led to us planning a series of encounters at each of our conferences, beginning with DSA last month, and then today, and then in November at the ASTR conference. And we were really led from this question: what is our collective practice at this time? And we meant that our collective practice in a number of different ways, but foremost, we were really thinking about our positions, not only as scholars, not only as leaders of academic organizations, but as artists who make work that brings people together to move and speak in public. And so really guided by that, we opened our June plenary, which was titled in that way. It was called President's Plenary, What is Our Collective Practice at This Time? And we opened that plenary with a collective voice activation led by two amazing singers, Utra Vijay, who had come from Australia with her collaborator Priya Srinivasan, and Dr. Karen Marguerite Wilson Amachefu, who is based in DC. And they led this incredible improvised voice activation that they began, and the whole group joined in. And from there, we asked a series of simple questions that attendees got into pairs, quartets, and larger groups to answer through gestures, words, and collective writing. The first one will sound very familiar because it's how Kirsten started us today. How are you? Meant in the very sincere way that you all answered here, like, what is it we're bringing into this room? We're bringing in fear, exhaustion. I'm just looking at the chat here, running on hope and spite, censored, angry, determined, all these things, right? So starting from that point, we then went to what do we need at this moment? And then finally, based on how we are and what we need, what collective practices can we imagine at this time? And Patricia will continue the conversation from that point in a moment. And then we closed with a movement and sound score that are put our bodies in motion together. So just as a way of wrapping up, I'll say this is all a roundabout way of answering the question: what do you think your organization or institution is doing or will be doing to support faculty, students, artists, scholars, all of the above, to keep things real this coming year? In short, we'll continue to support people to keep doing our work, and we'll continue to speak out for academic freedom. One thing we did last spring at DSA is we held a webinar series on in defense of academic freedom, and we'll be continuing that this year. And then just to close, I'll say, well, when I say we, I mean not only DSA, but this nascent coalition of ASTR, ATHE, and DSA. And we know this is slow work. It's hard to maintain amidst moments of crisis and urgency. It's about listening, especially to people who've already been experiencing this new normal that others will be confronting perhaps for the first time this fall. It's about building and maintaining relationships, and it's about using our skills and talents as artist scholars to create new ways of being and thinking and supporting together. So I'll turn it over to Patricia to continue to answer the questions.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank Kirsten for curating the space and for your Herculean leadership, and to Amy for moving the conference forward while also supporting ATHE and ASTR. So I am really grateful to be in community with all of you, and for the invitation to reflect together on the real. So because the pressure of our work and our communities are real and intensifying, coordinated censorship, political interference, threats to diversity programs, and sustained attacks, and the idea that education can be a site of justice, curiosity, and fear, we still keep showing up. So today I wanted to share some reflections building on what Rosemary just shared, and really thinking about what we learned from the recent DSA President's Plenary about collective practice. So as Rosemary said, the question that we asked the membership was, what are the ancestral, emergent, or experimental practices that can sustain us in this moment? And so one of the most inspiring parts was the way participants surfaced shared values. Things like listening deeply, practicing openness and empathy, and holding mutual regard for one another. Alongside that, we saw a beautiful emphasis on rest and joy as a form of resistance, whether through movement, dancing, or even just getting out and talking and taking collective naps en masse. And there was a strong call for interdependence over individualism through practices like barter, mutual aid, and partnership. But sometimes, as some folks noted, we just need to yell to let out the rage, grief, anxiety, and more. So we saw overlaps across the rooms. Listening came up everywhere. Food, movement, and gathering showed up as nourishment strategies. Joy, coalition building wasn't a single suggestion, it was a thread. And this cross-pollination helped us understand where we're already in motion and where we can align our efforts more intentionally. I'm just seeing some of the chats that you can't hear me, and I want to kind of check on that if that's still the case. Can folks hear me? So I'll get a little closer. Some groups imagined active labs, and I think this is where it gets us to thinking about action, which is one of the questions that was also posed to us, is concrete, simple ways to try things out, like creating ciphers of wisdom, informal ciphers of knowledge sharing, or organizing gatherings with intentional rituals, or finding ways to creatively use institutional resources we already have. These experiments, as we're thinking about the coalition building between the three organizations, could be accessible as hosting maybe a storytelling circle or cross-generational game night, as one group put as an example, paired with political education. We also discussed archiving as a living communal practice, and we ended with a call to embodiment. What does stepping out of ego feel like in your body? What does a chain link of energy between us look in space? Can a collective nap or group dance be a political strategy? So this gathering really reminded us we don't have to build from scratch. We already have the wisdom, but as Rosemary said, it is slow work, and we just need the time, the trust, and infrastructure to sustain it. I could talk a little bit more about what's going on in Virginia, but I want to move a little bit forward in the question of hope that was put onto us, and really also thinking through what collective practice can we create at this time. And because we've been navigating these multiple crises, we want to really think about what are the values that we practice. And what we saw in DSA is that the values we practice can become the compass by which we navigate this idea of restructuring, right? So a lot of us are going through deficit constraints, decreasing international enrollments, the real pain of needing to make decisions about hiring freezes, shrinking graduate cohorts, and some graduate programs are being forced to adapt, rotating admission cycles, or merging MFAs and PhD curricula, or rethinking cohorts or as a collaborative ensembles. And so these shifts are emerging, yes, out of necessity, but they also hold the potential for something more, not just survival, but transformation, not just managing loss, but building differently. And this spirit of transformation is already stirring in our fields. And I kind of want to note, just with the latest ADT issue on censorship, a roundtable led by ATBS, brought together by scholars included Priya Ruth Williams, Claire Seiler, Amy Hughes, and others, and many of them who are ASTR members. And Amy Hughes described the classroom as a site of the greatest freedom, a place where we must persist even when it's hard. She and others named how essential it is that we keep fighting for anti-oppressive pedagogy, especially in moments of coordinated silence. So what stood out most for me was how critical community is to this work. ATBS and other ATHE focus groups like LEA and BTA, as well as our respective organizations, ASTR and DSA, creating what Jessica Riddle calls circuits of hope, networks of sanctuary and strength across career stages and institutional contexts. Whether it's ATBS's anti-racist initiatives or ASTR's mentorship program, or simply checking in on each other. These are just not just as emotional supports, but connections across organizations that allow us to move forward. I want to check in on time, but I'd like to just think about the spirit of connection across organizations. We've been asking not only what kind of society we are, but also what kind of community we want to be. One that supports each other, not just as scholars or practitioners, but as human beings committed to life-affirming work in difficult times. A guiding question that our ASTR board has been thinking about this year has been, how can deepening our connections to each other and our communities serve as catalysts for change? This means asking what kind of pathways we can create together within our spheres of influence as individuals, as organizations, and in partnership with others to build trust, care, and ignite bold, imaginations. I just want to end with thinking about Adrienne Marie Brown, who has been just a voice of hope for me. And she reminds us that the most transformative thing we can do together is to deepen our relationship, ones that make space for imagination and collective action. So in our conversation, we asked, what futures are we trying to move toward? And how can we build a momentum in that direction? Thank you.
Okay, buenos días, buenas tardes, or buenas noches, depending on where you all are receiving this information. If anybody in the chat can say, like, you can hear my volume okay, I'm also, like, I want to make sure that this is, like, it's coming across. Thank you all. The first thing that I want to say is that I am sitting at this now in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina, speaking on behalf of me, CarlosAlexis Cruz, the current president of the Association of Theater and Higher Ed, and also myself as a researcher. We live in many places in which the lines can get easily blurred, and I want to respect and acknowledge that we all do that collectively as artists and people. I had something prepared, but I'm gonna try to keep everything less than 5 minutes and actually do more of a response to like what has happened and what has gotten us to this point, and the conversations that, as Patricia and Rosemary just shared, we began together as this bridge and effort between the three organizations. I cannot like sit here without addressing, one immediate reality of myself, and it is that 3 weeks ago I was in Montreal, just at a different conference, and then for the last 2 weeks I was in Puerto Rico. Being outside of the country for these past 3 weeks, even though Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and we can go into how I feel about all of that at a later conversation. it's pretty interesting to see the outside perspective of like what's happening in this country. And there is both a sentiment of disbelief, and at the same time there is the fear of assimilation that we people on other countries will follow suit. And so I took that as a I guess at heart in a way of like it's a call to action and not letting it kind of get to me in a sort of demoralizing sort of way. There is actually there has to be you know, some kind of collective action that we will figure a way to float together through these times and make sure that we once the next comes up we are ready to go in a way, but also enacting certain things right now. So I'll get into that in a second. um so yeah, so I think I the that with that with that perspective as in the background, hopping into what just happened, you know, with DSA and the conversations that we're trying to, um, you know, enact together as organizations. It is pretty clear that the what is happening across the board is felt in all states, whether it are southern states when their political dynamics, or northern states, or the West Coast states. There's a level of similarity there. And we as organizations, I think, have found us in a space where, um, you know, not only we are seeing our own membership struggle and trying to find their path through all of these things, but also is become or has become an existential question about the reason of why we exist. Um, with that in mind, I think many things have been brought to the table, including in which way we actually lean on each other as opposed to continue to silo and be in like individual spaces and just doing the work on our own. How do we work against the siloing like intent? Because one can argue that that's part of the dynamic that is happening right now, that is easier for people or to manage people when people are in individual setups as opposed to collective setups. And I always say this by way of sort of like framing a little bit as my mentor, Rosa Luisa Marquez in Puerto Rico, always said, if we can, people believe, it's a popular belief and it's a true belief that if we can gather, we can conspire. And they're wanting us, people, to not gather. I think first and foremost, our space, the ATHE space, is a gathering space. The ASTR space is a gathering space. The DSA space is a gathering space. We together make this community. We have had a history, like many places in this country, that has brought us closer to our organization or have pushed us away from our organization. But the reality is that a mission of an organization like this is to gather and bring people together. So then, what I would say, so one of the things that happened at DSA, having that same sort of like vibe and sentiment and energy, um, we acknowledge that there has to be a bridging effort between the organizations because the conversations are similar and we are similarly, you know, struggling and challenging and trying to like make do with what we have in this current time. So that what we learn from each other and actually ultimately we are the same people is very important, even though some of the other aspects might be different. Um, the other thing is, and I'm gonna lead with this and probably pass it soon so that we don't go on too long. It is, I have a few questions for us, and I've been asking since I joined the presidency role for ATHE as what does being a member of ATHE means, and how much are we willing to do as members of ATHE? Yes, we live in a dynamic in a country that a lot of our efforts are very transactional. We pay for something, we get something, and so on. That's the dynamic that we live. But one can argue that this moment in time is probably asking for something a little bit different in us as members to be more at the table to help steer things and be collectively together, gathering in this space. So there's one thing. The other thing that that I like, so I mentioned bridging between organizations as a space of gathering. I mentioned the membership idea to follow the concept of gathering. And the last that I would say is we all are, or not all, but most of us are in academic institutions. And we are waiting for ways in which, if we can get to this point, we can enact change. If we follow any kind of process into leadership positions and stuff like that, that's where we can do things. But I think we often forget the role of faculty leadership and the different spaces in which we can enter and be present in our own institutions to have the artistic spirit being felt, not just there somewhere in a corner. And if we can together also like encourage all of our peers in our organizations to be as present as possible in this moment, while I acknowledge that we have to protect ourselves from potential danger attacks and stuff like that is happening, but to be present and to lead from our own presence from the moment that we step in all of those rooms. I think it's imperative in this moment as things appear to be dire, and our challenge should be it's not dire because we are here and we're moving these things forward and we're enacting change. So I'm gonna leave us with that. Thinking about the gathering space in all those uh in those the different scenarios, and to be present. So thank you. And thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you, CarlosAlexis. I step up into the spotlight here. I'm Jake Pinholster. I'm the Dean of the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and want to acknowledge that I'm coming at this as the first of our presenters here who are looking at this from an organizational leadership standpoint, and the difference in perspectives perhaps an administrative view might give us. I am also going to start off by maybe deliberately and unnecessarily responding to the provocation that Kirsten provided us about the Frank Bruni, Ross Tithell, Larry Summers editorial, which is an interesting thing to be provoked by because it was intentionally meant to be provocative, of course, as the New York Times devolves into clickbait. And it is the musings of a bunch of increasingly irrelevant Ivy-trained pundits producing clickbait about Ivies for a newspaper that is desperately struggling with how to exist in this new world that we live in. And it also makes me think, and there's a lot of words in that article about the notion of intellectual diversity, like universities, in order to achieve a better sense of the real and coming back to conversations with their publics, must establish intellectual diversity. And this, of course, means to bring conservative viewpoints into the university, which always makes me think of Stephen Colbert's now very famous quote from the 2006 Correspondence Dinner, where he said reality has a well-known liberal bias, and that we need to understand that intellectual diversity doesn't mean making sure everybody's heard. It means making sure all roads to truth are possible. The editorial is also responding in part and from perhaps the most worst possible angle to the issue of increasing separation between universities and what I would call an egalitarian public mission. It is a mess of confusing and worthless notions in a lot of ways, but there is a thing that it's getting at that I think is really important for us to acknowledge, which is that we have become separate from our mission in certain ways. We have become separate from publics. We've suffered over the last 100 years, and this goes for both higher education and in the arts in terms of professionalization, from increasing specialization and self-referential validation of publications in journals that are only read by other academics and similar outputs which define quality or perhaps exceptionality on the basis of individual achievement in narrowly defined fields. This leads to stupidity like the association of phrases like social justice and diversity with a certain type of political identity claiming, rendering them confused and virtually meaningless rather than the critical cornerstones of a healthy society that they should be. This push for intellectual diversity and the persecution of wokeness are responses not to universities pushing too hard for progressive viewpoints, but rather an indication of our failure to make the public case for progressive sociocultural transformation strongly enough and in the right venues and outlets. We need to be more connected to our publics. Regardless of the level of straight up BS that obscures our ability to make sense of the current reality, we are truly under threat, largely due to the coincidence of the Trump administration's abuses with pre-existing pressures like the demographic cliff. It is very possible that we will lose 30 to 50% of the institutions of higher education in the US over the next decade, and that might be a conservative estimate. We have never faced this kind of threat before. We must respond to these pressures, these existential threats, the way that all species who survive respond to survival level threats, by evolving. We need a generous and generative approach to the transformation of culture by working in tandem with publics. And there's a really incredible book out there by a woman named Kathleen Fitzpatrick at Michigan State called Generous Thinking, which attempts to redefine the relationship of the university and community and publics, that I encourage everyone to read. It really should be a transformative work for the whole field. When it comes right down to it, taking action must mean something beyond advocating for ourselves, either individually or as an institution. It must mean to act in the world. It can't just mean speaking out on behalf of academic freedom. It must mean demonstrating the necessity of that freedom and why it exists in the first place. And at least for those of us in positions of privilege and power, it cannot just mean taking care of ourselves and our own communities. It must mean renewing our mission of service and care for the larger communities we are a part of beyond the walls of academia. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, there's so much to discuss, and everyone's put so many amazing things out there. So for those of you who do not know who I am, I'm Martine Green-Rogers. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Dean of the Theater School at DePaul University, complete with Penguin behind me, and also the incoming president of ATHE. I'm super excited to be in space with everyone today, and I am super activated in a brilliant way by what Jake just said. So, whew. I'm just thankful to be in community with these amazing panelists, and even more thankful to follow up in the leadership footsteps of CarlosAlexis. So the state of things, as I like to say, is complicated, no matter where you're sitting in this circus. It is not possible to escape this three-ring circus because everything started to fall apart at the same time. Now, I have to recognize that my world looks a little different than some of the people on this panel and even people who are watching now. I'm at a conservatory, at a private institution. I'm in a state and a city that has actively taken a stand against the current administration. Yet, Chicagoland isn't exempt from this. I'm sure everyone probably heard about what is happening at Northwestern right now. And if you haven't, I'm sure you'll probably hear about it because it was late breaking news yesterday. Also, with Columbia College Chicago, what's happening with them and their junk rating. There's just so many schools, even within this sanctuary city, in similar situations for varying reasons. And, just for some context on who I am as a person, I am a pretty positive and joyful person, but I'm also a realist because the dramaturg in me can't help it. And so what I do know is that if anyone can actually figure out how to get us out of this, it is the people who are in this space right now. We have all the tools we need to fix what is happening in higher ed right now. We are creative thinkers, no matter whether our background is in actual practice or in the study of practice, we are the people who can lead the way. And part of the reason why I say this is because I think about what's happening in my own current institution. Not to be weird or pat myself on the back or whatever, but generally, most of the time, the most outrageous yet really useful ways of thinking about how to come at some of these attacks that we're getting all over the place have come from myself and from my partner, who is the in crime at DePaul, as I like to say. He's the dean of the School of Music, John Milbauer. We are the ones who are thinking outside of that box to figure out how do we keep making things continue to happen in the way that we feel is important for our students. And so part of what I want to do is talk about and sort of pull on the threads of mission that some people have brought out. Jake has talked about it. So I think Rosemary talked about it. Everyone's sort of gone about it in some way, shape, or form. And so, and I also want to say, I just need to put this out here that these are things, I'm going to give some practical things, and these are things that I'm still doing, knowing that DePaul University is in the crosshairs of the current administration. If you didn't know, my president had to testify in front of the House committee They are looking at everything that we are doing right now, including what my school is doing. And honestly, what we've decided to do is that, and this gets back into all the lees, as I like to call it, morally, ethically, all these things. We have decided as a community what our values are and how we want to hold up the mission of DePaul University. And we are not budging from that because it's important to us. And it's the reason why many of us are here. So really quickly, I just want to run into the important parts of the DePaul mission, just so you understand the setup for this. So it says, as an innovative Catholic Vincentian university anchored in the global city of Chicago, DePaul supports the integral human development of its students. The university does so through its commitment to outstanding teaching, academic excellence, real-world experience, community engagement, and systemic change. DePaul prepares graduates to be successful in their chosen fields and agents of transformation throughout their lives. Guided by the ethic of Vincentian personalism and professionalism, DePaul compassionately holds up the dignity of all members of its diverse, multi-faith, and inclusive community. Through education and research, the university addresses the great questions of our day, promoting peaceful, just, and equitable solutions to social and environmental challenges. Since its founding in 1898, DePaul University has remained dedicated to making education accessible to all, with special attention to including underserved and underrepresented communities. Our mission is rooted in DEI. One of St. Vincent de Paul's most iconic quotes is that we do what must be done. So yes, I run a very well-respected conservatory program, but the mission is what brought me to DePaul. Has my institution asked me to do anything different yet? Not really. And that's mostly because our ethos is rooted in making sure everyone at this institution feels as though they are welcome and that they have a place to embrace and learn their craft. And this literally means everyone from like the white men that show up to like any other identity that you can think of. When they come to DePaul, our job, our mission is to make sure that we are creating an active learning environment for them to be able to make systemic change on their way out of here. So for that, like, we understand that our only way forward in our craft is to recognize that we have to embrace cultural competency for the stories that we put on stage, because how would we faithfully represent the world around us if we don't understand the nuances of this complex and ever-changing world? We have to prepare all of our students for shows that may not represent the background from which they are born and lived in. And we have to address the great questions of our day if we're going to find equitable solutions to social environmental challenges. So our plan is actually just to hold tight to the mission. It's all we're got, and we're actually just sticking to it. Honestly, fear is not an emotion I can afford to hold on to right now. As a minority in numerous ways, I don't carry many fears because carrying them keeps me from doing all the things that must be done. And so, the things that we're continuing to do, we still have a book club, we have trainings, we're revising our anti-racism and anti-oppression statement, not because we're afraid, but because we actually want to be more accurate about what we're doing and how we're doing about it. And our strategic plan is deeply rooted in the mission of the university, and we are keeping that front and center. But let's be clear, I also don't force anyone to attend any of these things. Like, all of these things are optional. If someone wants to learn more, I make it a path. I've made it a habit of holding a little extra money in our raised funds to support faculty, staff, and students when I can in their endeavors. Good example, we were actually blessed in my very first year to receive estate funds from the late Merle Reskin, and we actually took that money, divvied it up, and created endowed funds for our faculty, for our staff, and for our students to actually continue the work that is rooted in our strategic plan and the mission of the university. And like I said, as a result, if you're doing a project that actually fits into the mission of the university, you're automatically doing DEI work. And so, and I also am just super lucky that people generally tend to donate to our general fund when they donate to us, which really allows me the freedom to consult with others, because I'm a big fan of shared governance. So we actually have a whole like governing body inside of our building that talks about how we're going to use money. But in that, we continue to uphold that. And so I just want to kind of start to wrap up by saying actual advocacy is based in knowledge. I challenge all of you to lean into shared governance at your institution, and specifically to find out what is happening at your institution. As an administrator, I need my faculty, my staff, and my students to follow what is happening in the world and then work with me to stay ahead of those shifts and those changes. And part of the reason why I'm pulling this out, and I'm not saying this to put anybody on the spot, you know, I don't want to put anybody on blast, but whenever I open up conversations, there's inevitably someone who is going to say something that isn't actually rooted in reality. I've been known for saying things like, oh, that sounds like an amazing idea. That's also illegal. We can't do that. And that's part of the reason why I say I really need people to lean in, find out what is happening so you can bring real solutions, or at least a solution that we can bat around in terms of thinking about how do we stay the course. And then, if you have shared governance in a space, like I just saw Rosemary's comment is dismantled, that still doesn't, this gets back into what CarlosAlexis was talking about, gathering. They have not stopped gathering. And until they tell you cannot get into space and talk to people, like, let's do that. And so, I made the joke yesterday that right now as an administrator, I feel like I was playing Monopoly. I had my three little, like my places in a row. I started building houses on them. And then all of a sudden the game board got moved. I'm playing Chutes and Ladders and I'm just watching my houses go down those ladders. But part of the reason why it's also been, I've actually the calmest I've been as an administrator in a really long time, because of the fact that I know I can count on my faculty. And I really hope that those who are here from ATHE lean in, help me help you as we move forward. What do you need? What kind of advocacy do you need? How can we as a group lean in and help those who are in states that are finding all of this falling apart? Let's figure out how to actually just be on the ground with everyone and do this work together. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon to folks. I don't know, Kirsten, who I need to complain to having me follow Martine Keygreen Rogers. It's a setup. I just want to acknowledge that. I don't know whether we need to pass the proverbial offering plate to collect some of that money for the poll, or if we simply lean into what is the challenge before us. From my perspective as a sitting provost and an institution, a sister school of CarlosAlexis University, a University of North Carolina School of the Arts, some of the challenges that we face are, I won't say they are insurmountable, but right now they feel pretty insurmountable, right? And I'm reminded of the fact that this too shall pass. This is a moment in time. And if we think about where we were 100 years ago and 100 years before that, we've still keep on keeping on. And I firmly believe that the arts, in particular my university, University of North Carolina School of the Arts, we will continue to keep on keeping on by doing two things. One of which is focusing on the core mission, which is preparing amazing artists to enter their respective world sphere, acknowledging that the landscape in which they're entering is shifting, but we're encouraging them to enter that with the sense of entrepreneurship and ownership of said process, so they are not necessarily entering the same space that I started when I was an actor before I stepped into administration, but they're entering a space where they're creating their own realities. That's a culture, that's an ethos that we're nurturing in our students. And we're doubling down on what it means to engage art, not for the sake of art making, but art that is truly about transforming the human experience, that is creating catharsis, that will allow someone to see a situation differently today than perhaps they may have seen it yesterday. So that's the first thing that we're doing. The second thing that we're doing is we're understanding the political reality, right? Both the capital P political reality and the small p political reality. I like to talk about North Carolina because it is a space that arguably is a battleground. If you think about battleground states, Florida, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin even, these are spaces where arguably the extremes, right, far left, they're finding ways to try to anchor their perspective before that next generation kicks in and breathes life into whatever it is that they're going to breathe life into. We're in that space right now where we're feeling the weight of one particular vantage point, but arguably the opportunity to lean in and embrace a different vantage point, it's still there. And for us, the it's still there is simply acknowledging that it's important to speak into the listening. We can't stay in the space, and we're choosing not to stay in the space of us against them. I don't have that capacity as provost. I have to play with folks who may have thoughts, ideas about engagement, DEI, that differ from mine. As a former chief diversity officer at a major R1 institution, I've done that political walk and dance for many years. It is also true that there are common threads, common themes that you can agree upon and use those as the basis for collaboration and moving forward. When you're engaging in those discussions, it's hard to sort of make an enemy of someone that you've broken bread with someone that you spent some time with someone that you got to know a little bit about their family, their history, their origin story, really listening and understanding that and allowing that same opportunity for you to engage and share those elements as well. Those are the things that we're doing in North Carolina. I don't want to oversimplify and make it sound like it's as simple as just as, hey, let's go out and have a drink. It is being very intentional and very strategic and very mindful of when and where to push and when to where to fall back and when and where to realize you need to live to fight another day. I'm mindful that I have a fixed finite amount of time that I'm going to be in the role of provost. I'm also clear that I have a bully pulpit that I can use. And if I'm thoughtful about how I use that bully pulpit, Patrick may not reap the rewards, but the person coming behind me will reap the rewards. And so in a lot of ways, what's old is new. The sacrifices that our forefathers, our foremothers, our elder statespeople put in place for us to be able to do what we're doing today, that I would argue is something that we've lost. Now it's important to kind of get back to it, to realize that, what it meant to sit in front of a set of fire hoses or to have dogs sicked on you. Like, we understand that intellectually, but it's a different thing when you're living through it. It's a different thing now when you see people who are literally being yanked off the streets simply because of the way they look, right? Simply because they don't have their papers, right? Which was the case for slaves. Now you got to have your passport or your driver's license. That dynamic ain't new to human culture, human nature. It's our opportunity to realize we've been there before and be real thoughtful and intentional about the lessons learned and the steps we now need to take to ensure that we don't go back to those spaces in future times. I'll leave it there because I realize we're wrapping up in about 20 minutes and I would love to get to answering some questions and having more of an exchange. But thank you all for allowing me to be here with you. And again, I need to set up, acknowledge going behind Martine, Key Green Rogers, but appreciate you all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to our extremely ambitious and hopeful panelists and realistic and real panelists. What I want to do now, and please feel free to start in the chat. We have 20 minutes, which is not much time at all. But do you have questions or comments or answers? And specifically, what do you, I'm speaking to members of ATHE now. What do you want or need the organization to do for you? I'm not promising, certainly. I'm leaving my role and leaving the governing council. So I'm not promising that any of these things will happen, but we do want to know what it is that you want or hope or think that ATHE can do for you. I also want to say, as a little bit of wrap up, what I heard, which is not necessarily the only thing that was said, but what I heard is that in this moment where things are, in fact, very less than great, we must gather together. We must continue to talk. For most of us, we must stay the course, following our missions, whether that's the mission of the institution or the mission of our organizations or even our own personal missions. And we must actively engage other partners and other communities in that work. We also need to understand where we are within this political system and be sure that we are educated and aware. And we need to think about how our institutions, whether that's where we work or where we gather in community like this, can maneuver within those political systems and what we can do individually, given our different positions of privilege or not privilege, of freedom or not freedom, of justice or injustice. So what I want to do now is take a moment and say, please do some chats. And I've got Lindsay Cummings, and what I'm going to do is sort of pull some stuff out of the chat. But to give people time to chat, I want to ask our panelists again, is there anything only if they really have something. Is there anything you want to say before we go? Before we open it up, do you have any last words or thoughts?
Um, Something I just want to offer here, and it's along the lines of what I was saying, it's to ask the question of all of us, what is our collective practice? And putting the emphasis in the collective and also in practice. What is the together action? In which way when we are bridging and we are in different spaces, there's some of us that can say certain things and do certain things depending on where we are, and there are some of us that can't. And that's true across the board and across this nation and maybe across the world too. So how much are we willing to step into that table and make sure that we support each other with the things that we can say and we can say, that we can act and we can act? Just putting that as a framework, I think I like some of the questions that I've seen here, so I'm gonna let us get into that. But I want to offer, like, this is with the spirit of collective action. Um,
All right. I'm going to just jump in and say one of the things that I'm seeing in here is in this chat is are there strategies that ATHE can help with? And I'm asking our panelists now to think about, are there responses to this, or your institutions can help with in this idea of, do you have stories you can tell about staying under the radar, about being subversive and staying the course? Martine, please.
Thanks. So number one, I don't think that staying under the radar is actually a good strategy, because if anyone's been paying attention to the schools who have been brought out front and center in order to, basically be grilled by the House committee, I mean, let's just be real. Like, I'm all here for Haverford. Who was really paying attention to Haverford besides the people in that particular part of Pennsylvania? So, staying quiet and staying under the radar is not going to save you, which is part of the reason why being out and just saying the things that need to be said and taking advantage of people who are in places of positional power and in states and cities that are in some ways protected is where it becomes really important. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it was divine intervention that I am coming into the presidency of ATHE at this moment, because I am still in a state and in a city that I can say the things that need to be said and not necessarily have to, do I have to worry? Absolutely. Am I worried like existentially? No. So this is the time. Use your resources to say the things that need to be said. And I think this is back to the moment of like, how can organizations help in understanding these key advocacy strategies? That is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. How do we leverage people in places like myself, Jake, etc., that can do this work and do it loudly? So let's do that.
Yeah.
Well,
Here,
I'll
here.
come in as, one of the strategies I deploy as a chief diversity officer and still do as provost is recognizing there's value in understanding who the messenger is, and capitalizing on having the right messenger being able to deliver the message for the right audience to receive said message. And so that's just a simple, short way of saying, hey, if I walk in guns blazing talking about DEI and shame on white folks for getting rid of DEI, that's expected, right? Middle-aged Black man, former chief diversity officer. Yeah, I'm supposed to do that. But I have to find a way to engage my white allies. I have to find ways of engaging my other allies who are in other spheres of influence, this is the chancellors and above, to really talk about what is it I want accomplished as a result of said outcome or action. So for us, we're going back to the basics. Student success. You cannot argue with student success. If student success remains your North Star, the kinds of experiences that prepare students to understand what it means to be in a globally diverse world, to be an interconnected world, an interdisciplinary world, these are all elements that at their core are agnostic. They're not red, they're not blue, they're good things that we need to do. And if you can engage people in that point of entry for whatever the conversation is or topic, you have a better chance. I'm not saying it's going to guarantee, but you have a better chance of getting to an outcome where you can at least acknowledge that there's a common step that the two entities can take together. You may find that you only get one step, right? And pretty soon they go their way and you go your way. But the reality is you may not be the person to get the next step. in place. Someone else behind you or someone else beside you may be involved in that conversation. So it requires a constant surveying of who the stakeholders are and who the players are to really lean into what the outcome. We didn't get into this situation overnight. The strategy that's been deployed has been deployed for almost 35, 40 years, right? It takes time. We didn't get it in overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight, but it's important that we don't lose sight or hope in the vision of what we know is possible and what we know must be the reality, right? I'll leave it there.
I would just add, I think, to that just in terms of knowing what must be the reality, that the reality needs to change, that we have to shift our, just to go back to my points, we have to shift our thinking about how we relate to the world around us in really significant ways. That if we keep doing the things that we're doing, both as artists in this era and also as institutions of higher education, then that's a recipe for that downward spiral. I think that if we're not shifting ourselves to be more in relation to our publics, to take on more of an accessible public-facing mission, if we're not de-emphasizing the notion of elite, which is so poisonous to our institutions as a whole, even if it's not, I think most of the institutions represented here are not falling into that category in many ways. I think we have to just be rethinking about the people we're truly talking to, and that every one of us has a role to play in that.
Jake, can I ask you to give me an example on that, man? I love, by the way, what your commentary as someone who's at another public institution and wrestling arguably with some of the same dynamics we are.
Yeah.
What does that look like in your mind when you say investing more into the public space, the public sphere?
I mean, and literally working directly in tandem with communities and folks in the public to change the way we think about what makes productive work inside the university, and stopping the definition of achievement for scholars and faculty in the university away from an individual achievement of a profile in your chosen field to what's the impact you have directly on publics with your work. I think honestly, a lot of it has to do with that notion of individual achievement versus collective good. We have, over a very, very long period of time in this country in general, and also in our respective fields of the arts and higher education, gotten into that more and more. The notion that individual achievement is somehow the way we should rank the quality of a person's contributions to the world, instead of their contributions to collectivity. That's where liberalism and progressivism in this country breaks down, because we fail in many ways to understand collective action. We teach it in our schools that individual achievement is the route to success, and we don't think enough about how we are as collaborators and contributors to our communities that we serve and that we're a part of. And I mean that literally in terms of to the geographic communities that we serve, and also the larger discourses that we're part of that are not geographically located.
Just want to pick up with what Martine said in terms of really thinking of activating the faculty senate, if you do still have one. We've been working with AAUP. We have a strong AAUP chapter at the University of Richmond, and the faculty who have been involved there have been really pushing the faculty senate to work with the provost to be speaking out and being on top of the issues that are going on. And I think because at least we see in many institutions that there is a strategy of silence as a way of not making themselves visible or a target, it also isolates faculty, right? And so the period where you felt that you couldn't say anything, or you were working on eggshells because you didn't know how everybody felt. And it wasn't until our AAUP chapter was activated that faculty felt a little bit more safer. a little bit more safer to talk about what their fears were, anxieties were. And I think that idea, not only of collective, but how safe are faculty feeling about speaking their truths, and whether or not they feel their institutions are going to protect their truth, right? And so I thinking about how to work with these different hubs of agency, whether it's the faculty senate, whether it's AAUP. Some of our faculty are working with community organizations that are dealing already, have expertise with immigration issues and ICE, and how to handle that and support our students, even though, so thinking about how we bridge things that are happening in community into higher education, because sometimes we don't actually have the expertise of how to deal with ICE or immigration. And so working with some of the community organizations offers a different venue to see how we can work differently and restructure ways. I also think that part of the framing is really, we need to be reimagining how we do things. It can't be the same way, and I think everyone has said that, right? Like we can't just survive. We have to really reimagine and co-create something that is more just. And so the question upon us is, what is the collective practice that we can create together? And that's the question that the three organizations have been kind of thinking about. But I also want to add that I received an email from Charlotte McIver, who was saying that IFTAR and PSI are joining forces, and they were inviting ASTR to join forces again to think about this coalition building. So now I've invited them into our little coalition cohort. And so thinking about how we can create a critical mass of this, and how we can really show up for each other in each other's gathering is one of the things that we're really thinking about, so that we are cross-pollinating.
Could I jump in on that, Kirsten, real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Rosemary.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to see it, like there's a lot of theme in the chat about contingent faculty, non-tenure eligible faculty, what we're doing, like what is it not only that our organizations are doing, but if Jake's sobering numbers of like if this many institutions are going to disappear, what is it that we're training our students for? And, somebody in the chat mentioned very early on, are we training people for other career paths? But really, I think that these are so all intertwined. Like, what is it that we're defending in academic institutions and our professional organizations? And what is it that we need to actually, to go back to Martine, like what is that we need our creativity to reimagine what it is we're doing here with our programs, with our professional organizations? What are we supporting people to do? And what are we helping prepare people to do? Because, just kind of acting as if the system is the same is not going to serve our organizations or our institutions at this point.
I'm going to jump in. So first of all, because of my connection, I assume I am not able to see the last 17 chat messages. So I've lost my ability to see what's happening with that and to do any pulling together out of that in our last 3 minutes. But one of the things I wanted to say first was to say the end of what I saw was these questions about contingent labor, about the future of the field, and about how we can do support for those people who are most precarious. And that is something, contingent faculty is something that has always been extremely close to my personal teaching, scholarship, and certainly service or engagement or whatever mission. With that, the other thing that I saw, and what I, again, liked best about these online conference experiment that we're running, is that we had those symposia in February, March, and April that allowed ATHE members to come and share scholarship or teaching or whatever it was that people were sharing. I don't mean that in a bad way, but there were just all different kinds of things being shared in those one-day symposia. And I see here a couple of questions about, can ATHE provide space for us to gather and talk virtually throughout the year? And I hope as I leave the governing council, as I stop being the VP for conference, that I hope that we can, in fact, ATHE can, and other organizations can make some virtual space for people to share stories, to gather, to be in community, and to use partnerships with the communities in which we live, the communities in which we work, our higher education communities I'm thinking of, or our institutional communities, in order to have those conversations. I'm super conscious that A, I can't see if there's something super important that I'm missing in the chat, and B, that we have 2 minutes left. So I want to end with a thank you to everyone and an urge for all of us to come back and talk again and to make that happen, and to know that I want to make that happen and will sort of pledge to do that with my ATHE and ASTR colleagues. And to say thank you. Is there anything else anybody has got to say? And again, I'm so sorry I can't see what's happening in the chat.
I guess one thing I'll suggest, I believe it's Laura Sturm, Sturm. She's suggesting that the conversation continue at the Theater, Education, and Shifting Political Landscape. For me, it is the political reality. That's the thing we have to grasp. And we need to play a similar game, recognizing that it's going to take a couple of decades to enact. So there's the long-term strategy, and then there's the need to respond to things that need to be more immediate and responsive to the moment and now, and both of those things have to happen. I'm excited by what I heard today and seeing the great folks on the panel, so thank you for having me. It's a great group, and anything we could do to support y'all from Little University of North Carolina School of the Arts, happy to help.
I put it in the chat, but it's something that I think it's very important, and it's the fact that people are asking for legal resources, or what kind of legal support, or what kind of where does ATHE enter that space, if and how do we gather information, perhaps to have it accessible for people. And in my head went to, like, I think as somebody who runs a nonprofit, like, the nonprofit world is also collapsing in many ways. And I have said all along, and especially right now, we're trying to compete with a structure that doesn't speak to the business structure of this country. So if the arts constantly are trying to train us to say that what we do doesn't compete with that, doesn't fit in that structure, we are not gonna be sustainable. And that became even more evident after the pandemic, where people shifted their mentalities on the amount of time that we're willing to be at different places and so on. Similarly, if we as artists insist in not like that, this is not a legal situation, that we don't have legal possibilities to defend ourselves, it's also like, I don't like weapon metaphor, but I was going to say shooting ourselves in the foot. Like, it's not what we should be doing. It's not the world that we live in. I'm curious we have a keynote tomorrow with Alicia Tonsig is one of our keynote speakers. And from TCG, and like the dynamic that TCG has been going through and so on can be very informative for all of us. But I think it's something definitely to bring to the table. How are we doing things right now? How do we, in our university space, I have said this all along too, we are supposed to be a lab space for what is next, not a space of emulating what has been. We are a space of generating new knowledge and discovery, not recovery. And this country has like pushed for recovery recently as opposed to discovery. So if we allow our organizations to also be a space that brings that to the table and forth, that we are here to be a lab for what's next, I think we together can figure this out. But if we insist to just defend ourselves, we're going to lose the battle against a bigger dynamic and bigger structures in this country, from my perspective. And I know we're all here on the same boat, and that's what Patrick was saying earlier and so on. But yeah, just saying that.
Thank you. We are at time, so I want to say, knowing that this conversation, and I am now at 46 messages I can't see, knowing that this conversation has a lot to continue with and a lot of ways for us to continue, I want to thank again all of the panelists for being here. I want to thank all of the ATHE members for being here. I want to thank all of the laborers behind the scenes, Leanna, Tammy, Amy, for being here. Thank you. Have a great rest of the conference. Wow. Have a great rest of the conference. Thanks.